Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good night, wherever you are. My name is Michael Murphy. I am the president of European University Association, and I chair the EUA Steering Committee on Learning and Teaching. And it's a privilege on behalf of my colleagues on the steering committee and on behalf of the hardworking staff in the association to welcome all of you to the 5th annual forum on learning and teaching. Not at the University of Deusto in Bilbao as we had hoped, but once again we're in cyberspace, hopefully for the last time. And I thank the University of Deusto for their patience and of course for their willingness to have us in Bilbao next year, February 2023. So third time lucky. Can I express sincere thanks to the EUA staff for a lot of hard work in pivoting, is the word, from on-site to virtual reality in only 6 weeks since the decision was taken. But we still have some 260 delegates registered from 38 countries. And I take the opportunity to thank all of you for joining us. And I wish you all a fruitful learning experience. It's very obvious to me that there's a great vibrancy in the learning and teaching community in Europe. There's a new confidence, an enthusiasm to experiment, and a sense of excitement at this era of unprecedented change. One simple measure, some of you may recall that in October we issued a call for candidates to fill 2 vacancies on our steering committee for the forum. And we attracted no fewer than 33 applicants from 18 countries, twice the number in previous calls. That's an oversubscription 16 times, which is an impressive statistic, but it's testament to the enthusiasm in our community. Now, the conference is taking place in a wider context, and that context is one of growing societal interest and involvement in the education mission of our institutions. At the broadest level in Europe, some 7 years ago in Yerevan, the ministers for education in Europe, under the Bologna process, they shone a spotlight on teaching and learning really for the first time. And then 2 years later, in Gothenburg, the heads of government, the EU Council, devoted almost an entire meeting to the role of education as a key driver of European identity. And the communiqué from that meeting made lengthy reference to the importance of evolving teaching and learning, particularly through digital platforms and transnational collaborations. And that was a meeting, of course, that endorsed President Macron's aspiration for the European University Initiative. The education ministers have remained very focused on our agenda because in Paris, just 2.5 years ago, and again in Rome last year, the communiques, the Bologna communiques, committed to a pan-European approach to enhancing learning and teaching and assessment. And they even made reference in the Paris communique to this forum as a very important platform for innovation in learning and teaching. But it's not just in the outside world that we're seeing movement. There's a strong new move within the university sector itself to upgrade the status of teaching and learning in our institutional strategies. And when we consulted with the sector at EUA some 2 years ago, when we were reshaping the strategic plan for EUA itself, we received over 600 submissions. And in those, concerns about learning and teaching outnumbered those on research considerably. And we saw this again in 2020, when we consulted widely across Europe and beyond among academic experts and stakeholders from society. Teaching and learning featured twice as often as research when people were setting out their priorities for change. So when we drafted Universities Without Walls, our vision to 2030, and published last year, a few weeks after this forum, we deliberately positioned the evolution of teaching and learning first among the 4 university missions that we addressed in the document. And we can also at this stage take heart from publications in the past year from the European Commission on the European education area, the European research area, and most recently in the past month, the Commission strategy for universities. In all of these documents, there's extensive narrative on teaching and learning, and there's a new emphasis on reform of academic assessment, with a call to all of us to broaden the benchmarks, embrace qualitative as much as quantitative methods, but most importantly, to value learning and teaching in the mission of staff and universities as much as equally with research accomplishments. So times are changing, and that's the context in which this forum is now taking place. We all know that the pandemic has posed considerable challenges to everybody in higher education, but it's brought about a lot of innovation. And now, of course, we're rethinking the methods and the formats that will work best for our learners into the future. There are many questions looking beyond current emergency or remote teaching, questions about new technologies really enhancing teaching and learning, and how digitalization can be embedded in the culture of our universities. What are the implications of new technologies for internationalization? And they're the questions that we're now focusing on at this forum. So you will have seen that we have a mix of plenary and parallel sessions, and they're all focused on enhancing learning and teaching in a new digital world. And there will be particular emphasis on the work that has been conducted over the past year by our thematic peer groups. And of course, I must thank all of those people who contributed time and expertise to us over the past year. So welcome to the forum. I hope you thoroughly enjoy it. And I will hand over the camera and the microphone now to my colleague on our steering committee from Germany, Professor Kornelia Freitag, and she will introduce plenary session number 1. So thank you, Kornelia. It's over to you.
Now, dear forum participants, I welcome you to this plenary session on the question where education at higher education institutions is headed after the push towards online learning and teaching for the last 4 semesters. We will ask what mainstreaming of blended learning may mean and which implications this development has for both teachers and students. How does this change their roles in the recreation and creation of knowledge? And are teachers and students ready to face their new roles? What have we all learned in the pandemic that we didn't know before? And how does this help us to steer the further development of learning and teaching? In our session, you will meet a student and a teacher to present their views on the topic. We will start, as promised, with a video message by a leading representative of the European Students' Union. As ESU President Martina Darmanin was unfortunately unable to send a recording, ESU Vice President Jakub Grodecki kindly stepped in and sent a video. So let me introduce him to you briefly. Jakub Grodecki holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering and an MSc in management and production engineering from the University of Science and Technology at Krakow. As vice president, his primary focus in the ESU is on the quality and the digitalization of higher education. And he has worked as a quality assurance expert at the Polish Accreditation Committee and as a member of ESU's pool of experts on quality assurance. He will also join our discussion later, where we hope to engage you in an exchange based on his video message and the input by our expert on instructional sciences, Martin Valcke. But first, please listen now to Jakub Grodecki, and be assured that this video will also be available for you after the session in the forum lobby. So please listen to Jakub.
Dear participants of the European Learning and Teaching Forum, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's forum on behalf of the European Students' Union, the long-standing partner of the European University Association. Throughout the years, our cooperation as stakeholders through various initiatives such as this forum has meaningfully served us for shaping the policies, exchanging views, educating and promoting the best practices in the area of learning and teaching. For us, learners, the student-centered learning and teaching is a key to high quality of our academic journey. While the COVID-19 pandemic has posed considerable challenges to the higher education sector, it has also resulted as a driving force for innovations. When many universities, and particularly the heroes of these times, the teachers, had to rethink the teaching methods and formats that works the best for their learners in the blended or fully online environment. We are unfortunately meeting again online, and so did millions of students across the European higher education area for the past 2 years. Many of us were reflecting on the future, and some questions are still hanging around. How can new technologies really enhance learning and teaching? How can digitalization be embedded in a university's culture in a way that serves the institution's strategic objectives? How can the potential of digitalization be harnessed to increase equity of access to learning? These and many other questions will be at the heart of the future discussions, also during this forum. But are students ready to permanently switch to a more blended education? Well, it's not easy to define the readiness. On one hand, many were still lacking real face-to-face interaction, and the problems related to mental health occurred due to the isolation. On the other, there are concerns regarding technical issues such as access to the internet connection, places to quiet study, and studying materials. If higher education institutions or strategies aim for the development of blended learning, a lot of emphasis has to be both on equipping the learners and teachers with the necessary training and skills to prepare them for these challenges, but also considering the infrastructural ones. After 2 years of pandemic, we know more what are key challenges we have to solve before. Solely translating the learning and teaching methodologies to a learning space is not just enough. Throughout this time, we have received mixed signals coming from learners. Many of them enjoyed the flexibility that asynchronous learners gave them. The possibility to rewind and listen again to the hardest parts of the classes also added new feature to the learning process. At the same time, students were truly missing physical labs and practical lessons, especially in the field of applied science and faculties requiring these. Another level of interruption took place for students taking part in mobility semesters. Even with a growth of technologies that might allow for increasing the connection in the future, physical mobility has to go back on its tracks and not be substituted with a digital one after the pandemic. The pandemic has reminded us about one thing. If we want to be creative in the way how we plan out and think out of the box while organizing our learning and teaching, we can do it. The tools which are available can definitely prompt more and more active student engagement in the classes, and at the same time making the teachers' work more engaging too. But we cannot in these circumstances discuss only the interruption of the classes which took place on the campuses themselves. The parallel universe was developing rapidly in the area of open, or still semi-open, educational resources. Students using their time spent at home have massively discovered the opportunities that the online resources available have given. So far, the market of open education resources seemed to be dominated by the private providers, with few institutions developing their strategy to use so far. If our common goal is to broaden access to education for the wider part of our societies worldwide, the development of open knowledge and its provision shall become a strategic priority. We believe that the pandemic circumstances have built a solid ground for its development, and it seems to be a proven challenge for our higher education systems in upcoming future. These and other topics are crucial to ensure that all of us, students,
Yeah, many thanks to Jakub. And now I'm very happy to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Martin Valcke, who is in the process of joining me. There you go. Hi, Martin. So let me say a few words about you. Martin Valcke is a full professor in the field of instructional sciences at Ghent University, Belgium, where he is the head of the Department of Educational Studies in the Faculty of Psychology and Educational Sciences. His strongly interdisciplinary research focuses on the innovation of higher education and the integrated use of information and communication technologies. His research reaches from the implementation of information and communication technologies in learning and teaching at the micro level to its repercussions on the institutional and the policy level, with a focus on quality assurance activities. And you will find all this reflected in his keynote and a couple of polls he has integrated to see how your institution is doing on those points. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kornelia, for the kind words. And first of all, thank you for inviting me for this forum. And I think international collaboration in universities, that's extremely important. And you will see this also in facts summarized in this very short keynote. I also regret not being in Bilbao, especially because of the weather. We all have code orange and code red, even in some countries. So keep steady, fasten seatbelts. I have been asked to, focus on three main questions, and I will do it systematically. And you will see now and then we also will involve you in a poll. First of all, were our students and are our students ready to cope with the demands of teaching under the pandemic conditions? Well, I simply challenge you. Were you sure that even before the pandemic, students were actually ready for your higher education approach? Were they ready in view of the expectations you have about reading, listening, writing, tools, collaborating, being autonomous, planning, dealing with freedom and flexibility? And did you make your expectations in this respect really clear and explicit? So what we in fact try to say is that the pandemic crisis rather touched upon weaknesses that were present in many ways in a systemic system. What you here see are publications now dealing with topics that we no longer can neglect. Things about, well-being, burnout, stress, resilience, being able to communicate, questions about access to computers and dealing with online environments. These things are on the table and are in fact a post-COVID menu for universities to deal with. Key is that we have to move to a very explicit way of our expectations. What do we want our students to do? How and when? So in terms of discipline, well-being, their executive functioning, all these skills and competences we expect them to already master in view of collaborating, active engagement, their exam readiness. So we have to be very specific. And so the answer to the questions, are students ready? Is simply yes or no. It all depends on our investment and the development of conditional competences, and it depends on being explicit about our expectations. And in doing this, we put the student at the center, and we should also invest in learning to know our student. Now, simply to show you how important this is, you see here this study during the COVID pandemic, simply showing that we discovered that students do not really participate. Only about 50% really attended more than 50% of the online classes. You see that students worked less than expected. And for instance, the last one, do you have a separate room to study at home? You see that 60% in fact indicated no. So all these expectations we have about our students at home, well, maybe they were wrong. The second question is about what did we learn thus far? Well, you simply see here in this article, sorry, we cannot return to normal. That's the first general answer. And then you can structure, in fact, all these lessons learned in three clusters. So depending on the level, the macro level, that's rather national, international, the meso level, your institutional level, and the micro level, it's me or you in your classroom. Well, at the macro level, we discovered that universities, higher education as a sector, that they start to align practices depending on policies, but also depending on agreements between universities in terms of opening up, access, what conditions, financing, and then all these economical implications that affect us in terms of housing, scholarships. And I think in the European context, we are in a way lucky compared to, for instance, the Anglo-Saxon situation, where, as described in this article, you see universities going bankrupt, having to close down sectors or programs. On the other hand, you see that we also discovered during COVID an increase in international relations and an increase in collaboration. And this is somewhat surprising, but also interesting in the context of this forum. For instance, here in the study here of the International Association of Universities, you see that they discovered that 50% of universities, they invested more in partnerships. And this is a little bit surprising, but shows you, in fact, the power of what we are doing today. If we move to the meso level, so the institutional level, you see that you have a widening and an increase and an enriching of approaches about teaching and learning and organization and assessment and evaluation. But you especially see that for the first time, you could say, in the history of higher education, we have a focus on strong program level discussions, university-wide discussions about what is now our university, what are we doing, how will we deal with this. Also, we see that at the institutional level, we see a change in while dealing with resources, and especially the human resources. You could again say that for the first time, now we really focus on well-being, burnout of people. And we look at individual differences in our staff, especially staff with care responsibilities at home. And I'm not talking about children, but also, well, we have many staff members who also deal with parents and elderly in the home. And you see they have been affected in this situation, and now we see it has changed. Another one is, of course, at the institutional level, the acknowledgement of new ways of dealing with learning and instruction. And in this simple table here, and you can review the publication of the organization, that you see in many, many countries, you have this fundamental shift to new alternative approaches and an enrichment of ways for dealing with teaching and learning. And these examples here in these studies, they show a shift in peer tutoring models and shift in assessment models, a shift in what now is called the pedagogy of higher education. And the key one, and now, for instance, we can already push you a poll question, is this huge investment that we saw at institutional level about professional development. And we will ask you in this poll question, okay, did you invest more in general provisions of professional development in your institution? Because this professional development is also key to consolidate the lessons learned during the pandemic, lessons learned about adopting a teacher perspective, adopting a general professional development provision, and making choices about what will we especially prioritize in developing our teachers. And I hope the poll is now being pushed to you about your approach in your institution. Another one is, of course, our international mobility. And we saw already the representative of the student organization talking about mobility. Well, surprise, surprise, we see that over 60% of universities worldwide, they invested in alternatives for international mobility. And it has become now a richer pattern and a richer menu of options that we can present, in fact, to students and to staff to be engaged in policy, in mobility. And this is a key discussion we can have afterwards about how our organization here can be involved in fostering such approaches. Now, the micro level. Of course, for many teachers, that's where the business is, that's where the work is. And we used to have in the past this lonely cowboy feeling that's, well, me and my class, how to do this. Well, I have to say that one of the lessons learned is that we see that teaching now has become a professional activity. It's no longer something you do next to research, okay? And many teachers, they discover that, well, many things can be moved online, but also many things cannot be moved online. And you have to adopt, in fact, new tools, new strategies to, in fact, cope with these new demands while considering also your own well-being. And then you get all these kind of new tools. For instance, here, this is in the context of monitoring thesis support. We know we have master students, you have to work in relation to monitoring their work. This is mostly very strongly related to personal relationships, strong engagement. While you see the new environments, they are able to do this. But teachers have to learn to know about this. So what we see in general, lessons learned, is that we have to improve in general the crisis management readiness of our organizations, especially in view of the future. And now I move to the third question. What about these open educational resources? What about the future of them? Also, our student representative talked about this. Well, the research shows that, for instance, in these countries here, the open educational resources, they really helped during the pandemic. On the other hand, if you look at the reality, again, I ask you now to reply to this poll question. How many of us did really use open educational resources? And even in the other way, how many of you moved your own resources online for others? Now, we can make a distinction here between tools and content. When we talk about open education resources in terms of tools, you see an extremely rapid adoption and a distribution of tools, but mainly, well, with questions about cost. What do they cost? And many of them are in the hands of rather commercial organizations, and we all of a sudden had to invest a lot. So this poses a question: what can we do about this in an international collaboration? And then the other approach to these open education resources in terms of content. Well, you will see that in the research, we see there has hardly been an increase in investment in open education resources to be distributed to others. And I think here there is a job for our organization, the EUA, to in fact push the use and the development together. We all know teachers, they like to use their own resources. But why not, in fact, do that more in a co-creation way in projects together with other organizations? So here, the role of university collaboration is very clear: to develop, in fact, repositories of open educational resources that can be shared. And then again, we can look at partners within our own organizations, such as, for instance, libraries, that could help us to, in fact, adopt these resources in terms of content and tools. Thank you, and I'm open for your questions at a later stage. And I hope Kornelia takes over again now.
Okay, and you should be joining me on screen, I think.
I'm here.
And Jakub should also join us. There he comes. Great. Welcome to Jakub in our discussion round with the audience. And while the audience is still, starting to ask questions, we might have a look at another poll. I'm not sure whether it was already pushed to the audience, the one whether the pandemic seemed to have affected also your international partnership. Yeah, there it comes. So would you please answer the question whether something changed, whether you are more engaged, less engaged, maintained the previous level of partnership? And maybe, Martin, while the audience is still answering, you might start talking a little bit about your own experiences.
Well, it was in fact fascinating to see that in a way we were isolated during the pandemic, but on the other hand, my mailbox exploded. All of a sudden you got more, in fact, colleagues asking about how are you doing this, or can we do things together? And since we are, as a university here in Ghent in Belgium, strongly involved in international collaboration, also at educational level, we really had to look for alternatives. For instance, a huge number of our students, they take internships abroad or in companies. So these partnerships had to be reshuffled, had to be redefined, and it worked. And we keep going now with these, so we don't drop them. And that's the interesting thing that also, and then another question pops into my mind, it's about sustainability. Now I think we found solutions that are also more acceptable in terms of sustainability. Travel, often questioned because of ecological reasons, but also of time efficiency reasons. Well, we see that these alternatives now help us to do. In the context of these partnerships, it's not only about simply mobility, but it's a lot also about these resource development. Yeah? So we have the traditional programs of Erasmus for shared program development, but you see next to that a lot of partnerships, bilateral partnerships or multilateral partnerships to focus on let's do this together. And from now on, share a little bit the burden of development, implementation of these programs. And that question is very strong, while it puts questions forward for international organizations to monitor this, because normally it's our own national board that accredits or confirms that programs are being accepted. But the more we do that is in the international arena, we need a kind of supporting partner to look at quality, accreditation, and so on. But I think I'll stop here because many people already replied to the poll. And I think also for students, these partnerships can be challenging, but might also offer new opportunities. Maybe Jakub, do you have ideas about this?
Yeah, I wanted to actually add to this that the main partnerships that entailing the students' reality are, of course, the mobility opportunities. So that's not going into the research part of it like later on, because that's more for latter students' engagement and those who decide to step out in the academic career. However, like for these who are, of course, like during the study, were planning on to take this mobility experience, and of course the willingness for mobility is in general terms growing. We are talking about the growth of international students in a global sense, and the predictions for 2030 and so on are going massively up. We are talking about a 1/3 increase when it comes to long-term predictions about UNESCO's numbers and so on. So it's going to be a reality, as you were saying, Martin. Actually, the easing up these cooperations when it comes to the frameworks around the institutions, around the quality measures, around joint degrees, is a topic that is actually on the table right now, being proposed on the policy dialogue there. So hopefully in a few years, this whole burden, this administrative like package around this key concept of the students going somewhere will be easing up even more, because Bologna throughout 20 years gave us a lot when it comes to recognition, when it comes to mobility opportunities, when it comes to qualifications being achieved around. However, like to easing it up still on the systematic level is a key. And also right now, looking at the numbers from our colleagues from ESN, because they had a survey throughout the Erasmus, around the Erasmus program, basically the willingness to go somewhere physically is even higher than before, because all of these people who are for 2 years planning to go anywhere, to take the mobility experience, are finally starting to kind of having this chance materialize at some point. So be prepared as your institutions for a wave of people willing to come to you, and let's try to organize it somehow.
Yeah, definitely. Martin?
Can we address another topic? Because there are some interesting comments in the chat box about that due to COVID, in fact, new types of students have been able to engage, in fact, in these international collaborations and partnerships. For instance, in my situation, more than 1/3 of the students are now working and studying at the same time. They could not be engaged in the traditional mobility programs due to their personal circumstances. But by moving to these alternatives, you see that they are better able now to also to join in these partnerships and in these alternative mobility schemes. And the same with students with specific challenging backgrounds. Now they are better able to do this. And I think it's key that we, in fact, during COVID, we learned in a better way who our students are and what their specific needs are. Whereas in the past, we said, okay, it's an offer. It was very supply driven. And now you see that what we organize at an educational level, for instance, in terms of international mobility, is much more, in fact, demand driven, that we rather look also at what are the specific questions students ask and what are the specific needs. So I think that's a positive thing that comes out of these COVID pandemic crisis.
And you can really see that the poll substantiates what you're saying, because obviously most of the answers were indicating that also in their universities the mobility increased, but it was of course virtual mobility, and that was what we are talking about, definitely. So let's come to some of the questions that we see being asked, and I would definitely encourage the audience to ask more questions and put them into the Q&A box on their screen. So let's turn to the first question. To what extent have regulatory impediments impacted university capacity to adopt new pedagogical and assessment processes? Definitely one of the crucial questions every teacher comes across when trying to change something. Martin, you are nodding.
Yes, it's the question already popped up yesterday in another meeting with Polish universities that, for instance, in our setting, we are allowed to have courses, and the evaluation is simply without final assessment. Okay, and of course, during COVID, this was in many ways a solution that you said, okay, because there is no face-to-face teaching, no face-to-face exams, we will do it much more work-based, project-based, activity-based evaluation and assessment. And the Polish colleagues said, yeah, but we are not allowed to do this because our government. But you see that in other countries, you see that the universities started this discussion with the regulatory bodies about we have to change things, otherwise it becomes impossible. And for instance, having a complete exam online was in some institutions impossible because of all these ideas about fraud and the negative, potential negative outcomes. This even led, for instance, in our university to the design and development of a new tool to monitor, in fact, the quality of the outcomes of the evaluation. And so the funny thing is that now, because of COVID, we have a new tool to look at the behavior of students based on exams and assessment from 10 years on with a 10-year window, and to see how things change, and also to see whether there really was an increase or a decrease in students succeeding during these nearly 24 months of work during COVID. So on the one hand, you see, you have to look for solutions. On the other hand, you need to start discussion about what are we allowed to do? Can we change things to deal with this? So the question of Michael is really important. So we have to start discussions about this. And I know now some Polish universities, they have accepted new rules, discussed new rules, others didn't, and are now in trouble because they cannot move forward. So I think also their international organizations or collaborations can help inspire, in fact, leadership in universities to check regulatory bodies, to start discussions with regulatory bodies and play a kind of stakeholder position in these discussions, that universities are not alone in a discussion, but in fact are also supported by international bodies to adopt new directions and to push, in fact, regulatory bodies to change very well-meant quality argumentations from the past.
So Jakub, did you also hear from the student side comments on this, or is there an attitude of ESA?
More about the assessment, because of planning of the whole year, learning and teaching was very much unfortunately onto teachers, with in the best examples with the support of the learning and teaching offices that would support in creation of this online learning and teaching. But there was like many funny stories actually coming from students, and sometimes not funny, about the assessments, which have been developed in a way of a very kind of I would say lonely cowboy. That's lonely cowboy thinking. So like forcing students to kind of put the cameras over the room against cheating and so on. Like, but because of course, like the one teacher in itself may be able to design the assessment procedures that is kind of fitting the purpose, but also is being kind of just for the students and not kind of putting the additional pressure to that. But it's likely less chance to do so properly in the scale of the whole university, to provide some pro-learner measures and kind of conduct the assessment in a correct way. So when it comes to also the systematic solutions, I would also not say that it's always like the national regulations that are forbidding, but that might be sometimes connected with the blockade, kind of sometimes the perception of the university itself. So it's happening in the different stages. I know universities in Poland that definitely switched immediately by the decision of the autonomy of the university to that, okay, we are taking this strategy immediately. They're supporting the assessment procedures in this way. That's a new procedure, and there we're fine. But indeed, like the general support, the systematic level support, that yes, you can do it as best as you can, and giving the liberty into that with some certain measures, what was not always the case. So for a long time, we've observed that universities, institutions, teachers and serf were lost, right? Because of lack of the reaction towards planning of these activities. And of course, like students afterwards were also confused in some cases, many stories.
So it seems that it's national legislation, but it's also regulation in the own institution. Yeah, it's even the regulation that a teacher, him or herself, starts in his or her classes that may not go together or may have worked upon to go better with each other, definitely. And I think we also touched upon the lonely cowboy question. So let's come, yeah. Martin, you want to
There's a very interesting question about, so you had this international study where we discovered that, in fact, students participated less during online teaching and learning, and even attendance in the class dropped to below 50%. So there was really a lonely cowboy then at the other side of the screen. Now, where are my students? Well, it's a good observation, I think, from Burkuteshka and Unal, that she says, yeah, but is there another contradiction here that you say, they are not participating properly, but then they are not engaged? Well, you have to see, I have been a student myself, okay? So we have to be very honest here in our thinking. What drives student engagement? Well, what drives it is, of course, it's their motivation, but when are you motivated? Well, first of all, you have to feel that what you do matters, okay? Secondly, what you do, it results in something that you're rewarded for. So many students, they are economists, and they simply calculate the amount of time and energy they invest to see what is the outcome at the end. So if your evaluation is simply a multiple choice exam at the end, and there are multiple examples of the multiple choice exam online, then you simply say, goodbye, teacher, okay? There is a life outside the university, okay? So, and they simply say, I'm looking at the questions and I will, in fact, then study towards this kind of assessment. So we see that teachers who also shifted, in fact, their engagement from sitting in front of a teacher in the classroom, and they don't sit in front of a screen, the moment they say, no, I shift now more to project-based work, I shift to activity-based teaching and learning, where my teaching completely depends on your output. And by the way, we even have teachers who simply say, first you have to do this, and only when you did this, you're allowed to enter the online classroom. So you see, I used the word discipline in one of the first slides. Well, you have to impose some discipline in your own classroom. And the first discipline addresses your own behavior, okay? So you have to be very disciplined yourself to model, in fact, the behavior for the students. And you see teachers who adopted this, they have a stronger engagement in the classroom. And for instance, when you really, for instance, I have the habit of addressing exam questions during the class. That matters for the students. Or I also always use input from students in my class. Okay, so you see the research is very clear there. There's a relationship between what matters for students in terms of what do I get back from my engagement and what do you invest that helps me. So if we don't build up a relationship through this screen and this camera with polls and questions and when we do not react to the chat box, then people will simply say, well, I'll watch the recording tomorrow. And I'll watch it at double speed, by the way, so it will save time. And then it's Kornelia speaking like this. Sorry about this, Kornelia. Okay. But this is a habit students have. They say, what is the easiest way for me? But they will only attend class if there is a return.
Jakub, would you like to react here and add a little more the student perspective?
I'm a huge believer that it's not always like that when it comes to the outcomes calculation. I just as a matter of the fact, we were kind of I was also like trying to pick up the studies additionally during the pandemic, but also to see how it is. And I very much agree with the matter of engagement, like behind the screen and like creating this engagement. And that's true. Like if students see the work that is being put to organize the learning materials, to organize the videos, to do the activities that are like getting students' attention towards this classes, it was also learning very much respect. Like even it was not perfect because it was, for example, first try for the teachers to do so, it learned a lot of respect, and the turnover in the classes were very much high. And of course, like immediately you saw students putting on their camera, being active on those classes, comparing to, for example, listening the lecture in itself, which, for example, in another case, teachers were recording the whole lectures first, and then the whole discussion happened, actually, which for the first time there was a time for this discussion, because comparing to, for example, the usual class when it was like in front of the ladder board, there was a lecture combined with some question posed. For the first time, it was given a 1.5 hour regarding one topic to discuss it. So people were watching something previously and preparing to the classes, and then having an open discussion and like solving the issues. So that was, for example, increase of the quality of some classes. But there were many examples and experiments, I think, are in front of us, all with this also immersive kind of experiences with the VR, with augmented reality possibilities that are awaiting there. I'm not talking about now, it's easy to design, but like looking for the future, I think it's a very interesting way to engage, and that's where we will be going to.
Absolutely, and what you say really confirms that if flipped classroom scenarios are very good scenarios, and we found this out again. And I mean, for the last 4 semesters, I think many teachers also changed how they address their students, because they found out the hard way that this is not so easy. Still, there is a question how we deal with the mental health problems, and everything we've said so far really deals with the healthy student who makes her or his own choices and is more or less engaged. Now, could you say something about this? Because we know that this is one of the biggest problems of our students, especially for the last semester, where somehow all the problems mounted, and even very engaged and very diligent students started to have problems. So are there suggestions? Martin, and then Jakub.
Okay, so I think this is a key question that, again, in fact, projects us back to the pre-COVID situation. To what extent did we know things about mental health of students? Well, of course, we all have our health provisions. We have doctors in universities. We have a kind of, free, in fact, consultation. There's a psychologist they can consult. But this was a kind of offer that was there. And we see that during the pandemic, all of a sudden, we saw that this offer was not enough because we don't know actually what is going on with our students. So one of the key things here is that teachers were never aware that in a way you're always that you're also responsible for the health of your students. So of course, if we are in kindergarten, we all consider that teacher to be responsible for the health, mental health of our kids. Primary school, yes. Secondary school, less. And then all of a sudden university, oh, that's no longer our problem. Okay, so sorry, but we put students in a certain environment that we create. We create a relationship or a non-relationship with our students. We impose work on them and have expectations. And we don't cater about their mental health. So I think the first thing is we should learn to know who are our students and what their needs are. The second one is we used to have a demand, a supply-driven model. There is a medical doctor, there is a psychologist you can consult. I think we as teachers, we are the first to know when students drop out. So, for instance, yesterday we had a meeting with all the teachers in the first year program. An online meeting, sorry, again, an online meeting, but at least we had a meeting to discuss how will we start the semester? What are our expectations? Do we foresee problems? And then we will have a follow-up discussion a month later. This never happened before. So it means that to discuss our teaching and learning approach at program level with our colleagues and to enter the discussion about student perspective is key. And we really invite the representatives of the students as stakeholders in these discussions. It's not simply professors talking among each other. It's the voice of the students is always there, okay? And we changed a little bit the role of the student representatives. And I think there, Jakub, I think that's a very strong position you're in. They also have their antennas. We have antennas as professors, but students and representative students have other antennas. And you need to get this position of enter indicators, enter signals that something is going wrong, that we don't meet expectations of students. I don't want to turn every teacher into a psychologist, of course not. But we should develop this dimension in ourselves that there is a dimension in our students, there's an intellectual dimension, but there is also this well-being dimension, this attitude dimension, this belief dimension that we should cater for. So it's not really a solution, but it should be a perspective we adopt, and it should become part of our discussions. What are we doing in a classroom, in a program? And do we listen continuously to the student's voice? Not simply once during a faculty board meeting, but do we have all kinds of sensors in the organization that give us the information about individuals and groups of students?
And that is, before Jakub can take up here, I think that also goes a little bit to the question that Paul McSweeney asked in the chat. Will recording lectures lead to lower attendance in person? I think whatever is going to happen in the future, in the next few semesters, we need students back on campus to talk to them in person, because to find out how well some student is infinitely more clear when you are in the classroom with the student than if she or he is sitting on the screen and probably hasn't the power to even switch on the camera. So I think we really need to find solutions to bring back students on campus, to make them work in teams again, to interact with people and their video conferences will not be the solution, which doesn't mean that we rule them out. Jakub, I want to bring you on into this.
Yes, absolutely. Like that's what I wanted to also add to that, because before we were talking about the benefits, I would say, of digital learning, of possibilities that happened online when it comes to like provision of the lectures, but it has to be very well balanced, and like all the students are saying that they require also the interpersonal skills to be developed. They will live in the society. People will live in the society apparently after their studies, not like just studying for a few years, but the skills, the lack of skills that students will be missing because of this is kind of significant. So to give them back, so to bring them back to the university is a crucial issue to do so. That's out of the question. When it comes to the mental health of learners support, I very much agree with the approach of having kind of radars and being able to listen on the level of faculty, on the level of support systems in the university to kind of get this informations and deal with them. And of course, I really much agree with the not only the offer should be there, because we cannot expect people to only use the offer. It's same with the mobility, right? It's like has to be also encouraged. So also meetings with the students, maybe some activities that would get the students together, because we've also noticed that there is not even the community building sometimes happening. So when the teachers were asking students like, do you know what is happening with the students XYZ? Students in the same class didn't know what's happening with the students XYZ. So how the teacher was about to know, right? So maybe something like a community building, like starting with this and putting even more emphasis to the role of having this community when students are entering the faculties, the new basically their faculties, their groups, is something to maybe put more emphasis on that.
Exactly, and I have to stop you here because we are running out of time. It was a great discussion. Thanks for the questions, for the chat, and I think we can really wrap this up by quoting from the last question, because communicating purposeful, that will be very, very important, no matter whether you are online, on campus, even outside of class. And I think to know where you are, to give the students a feeling that they are welcome, that they are respected, and that we are all in this together. And we also together decide what channel to use. That is absolutely crucial for all of us. So thank you again for participating in the discussion, Martin, Jakub. Thanks the audience. And I hope that everyone else is staying with the forum. Please move back to the virtual lobby for the break. You do this by clicking leave in the top right corner of the screen. For now, take care and goodbye.
Goodbye.